So welcome and thanks for joining us for this latest Deckhive Introduces webinar. This is the first one we've done for a number of months actually, but the first of a number of sessions we've got in the coming months where we look at various different card decks that are available within the Deckhive system. So if you're not familiar with Deckhive as a platform, I'll give you a quick introduction to that in a moment, and then we will get to meet Kath and learn about the background to working with resilience and the resilience at work decks and how that came to be, and more importantly, how we can use them and what they can be used for, whether you're working online or in person, in fact. But we'll certainly look at the digital version of the tool today as we're using Deckhive. So in terms of background, just very briefly for Deckhive, you can explore that in your own time if you haven't already. If you go to deckhive.com, you'll see that we have a number of different card decks available in the library that you can use in digital settings, whether you're working one-to-one or with groups. And it's a fully interactive system where people can get involved and choose cards, move them around, flip them over, and so on, as you'll see shortly. And we have a 30-day free trial available. So if you wanted to practice and have a play and explore the library yourself, I'd certainly recommend that you do that and see what's available during that free trial. There's no obligation to continue after that point. You don't even have to add any credit card details or anything like that. So it's a purely risk-free trial to give it a try and see how well it can work for you. So that's enough about that for now. But first of all, welcome, Kath, and thank you ever so much for joining us at the end of your day in South Australia.
Oh, lovely. I still get great joy at people popping up on the Zoom screen across the world. I don't know, it must be a bit odd after 2 years, but it's still great to connect. So hi, everyone.
No, I feel the same. And actually, I don't know about you, but I find it slightly more exciting when someone joins a session like this and they're just a couple of miles down the road and I don't know who they are. I find that really quite amazing that you can sort of be in these kind of sessions and meet people. I met someone just yesterday who I could almost see their house across the field from my window. So it's quite amazing how that works, isn't it? So we're here to talk about your journey in part, and so that might be nice to start there, because I think it's always good to hear a bit of background in terms of how you ended up doing what you do and how you ended up creating these card decks. So where do you want to start in terms of your backstory?
Yeah, so I guess it started about 15 years ago. So even though resilience is one of those words that we probably could call a buzzword over the last couple of years, I got really interested in this around 15 years ago. So my background is I'm an organizational psychologist, and so what I was finding in my work were people were starting to ask for resilience, and there was a lot of reasons why, perhaps people were being negative or there was too much change, but it was a really new word in the workplace, because, in psychology, resilience has been around for a long time, but people were starting to use the word in workplaces. So I became really interested in, if resilience is important, and that's the word they're using, what actually are they looking for? What's the problem they're trying to solve when they're asking for resilience? And of course, even way back then, which sounds almost really mad to talk about now, it was having to do more with less. It was having difficult clients and stakeholders. It was lots of change and uncertainty. It was particularly the environments I was working with, lots of complexity, so there were the sort of problems that companies were looking at right across the board. And they were saying, well, resilience is our answer to this. So then I thought, okay, well, if resilience is the word that resonates, what actually is it at work? And so at that stage, there was very little around what resilience looked like at work. So I started to look at, if I was a resilient employee, what would I be doing and how do we measure that? So way back then, I'm a practitioner, but I'm quite closely connected, particularly with the University of South Australia. So I sort of collaborated with academics. And the first thing I did was to develop this measure called the Resilience at Work Scale. And it's just a very straightforward measure that looks at individual resilience. And that really resonated, and I was really quite surprised. I would have people sort of wanting to use it in their research and, practitioners wanting to learn about it. So I was really quite surprised by that. So that sort of took off, and I just got actually just got an email today to say there's now 200 citations of our work, and we've been supporting about probably 150 university studies now with this measure. So it sort of went really quickly. And I'm always, with my organization, psychology head, I always wanted to look at systemically, how do we do this? Because it's all very well to say, right, Martin, you've got to be, what does resilience look like for you? What does it look like to be resilient in your environment? But of course, we all know that in workplaces, our context is really important. So our teams can lift us or they can deplete us. Our leadership can totally pull the carpet from under us, or they can really build us up. So the next piece of the journey, and you'll see all this come to life when we start to look at the cards, I was really interested in what is a resilient team? What is that team doing that enables them to have a healthier relationship with their challenge, to adapt and be proactive, that team aren't doing, and despite having the same challenges, the same system issues. And out of that evolved with Lynn Boyd, another academic, the Resilience at Work team measure. Mm-hmm. And then we looked at a leader measure. So essentially, over the past 15 years or so, we've developed this, I think it's the only systemic approach to work resilience that's published in the world. So it's really about aligning what I do with the team, with the leadership. And so those assessments are sort of at the base of what we're talking about today. So it's been really exciting that researchers have started to use it as a measure of choice. And I get some incredible studies. So just last week, we had one from Zimbabwe. We had one which was about unexpected missile attacks in Tel Aviv, so all sorts of amazing work in this resilience space. But then the other piece is that we then started to train practitioners. So we've got about 700 people now globally who actually use our work. And I call them our raw community, our Resilience at Work raw community. So that's sort of, that's the journey in a bit of a nutshell, really, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's good context. And I can see, there's always a risk, isn't there, with resilience, that it is pushed onto the individual. The organization says, well, we've given you some training, or we've kind of asked you some questions, but really it's your responsibility to deal with whatever we throw at you. So yeah. I like the sound of kind of this being much more about a more systemic approach, more holistic approach, and more realistic, actually, because if we can fix the context and make things better in that regard, then it gives everyone more chance to build their resilience as an individual, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. And I think we talk a lot about weaponizing resilience, exactly what you're saying. It's your issue, your problem, topping up princess. But I'm about resilient cultures, and my version of resilience is a healthier relationship with the challenges you're facing, adapting to what's happening, but also an eye to the horizon around proactivity. So it's not a bounce back. It's really how do we best thrive in this system together with alignment between the various aspects of the system that we're working with. So sort of the approach, yeah.
So how did a deck of cards or multiple decks of cards then come to be in that journey? Because it sounds like you were kind of very much about measurement and a sort of an empirical approach, whereas a deck of cards might not make you think of that kind of approach.
Well, the interesting thing is that the assessments were always developed as a development tool. Okay, so right from the beginning, I wanted to make sure that the assessments informed very practical actions that were sort of within our influence, either individually or as a team, to actually implement. So once we had the measure, it was a very easy then journey to what are supporting resources. So I wrote books, we did workbooks, and of course everyone loves cards, don't they? They love cards, especially the tangible pieces of them. And now we've got them in this wonderful Deckhive space. But it became a really natural progression to extend the sort of resources, I guess, to include card sets, and that's how we got to the 3 card sets.
Excellent. So, well, we'll kind of give people a chance to see, if they haven't already, how the decks work and what they look like, and a part of that obviously is your model. But so John, just to kind of clarify, in terms of the 3 decks that we have, what are they?
Yeah, so we have a personal deck, and it revolves around resilience at work individual measure, the model that sits under that measure. And it's basically what you need to do to be individually resilient at work. Now, remember, all of this is at work. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that that's context. So that's called the individual set. We then have the team set. And the model of team resilience is quite different from individual resilience. I think it's a misnomer that a resilient team is a group of resilient individuals, but we know that's not the case. It's quite different things you need to do together, because it's about alignment, which you'll see in shortly. So we then developed the team model, and then so we have this team set, which you would use for teams. And then we have the leadership model, which is what you would use if you are working with a leader and working with them on how do they create a culture in their team that co-creates resilience. Okay. So those 3 lenses create 3 packs. Yeah.
And do you need to use them all together as part of a program, or can you use just one aspect of that at any time and find that there's benefit in doing that?
Probably the most frequent feedback I get is how flexible these models and cards are, because you can use them all. You can use one lot, you can use 2 lots. It all depends on what you're working on. So if you're working with a leader, for example, then you might be working with them on their individual resilience. How are they showing up? But you also might be working with them on their leadership of their team. So you would use the individual and you would do the leader. Similarly with a team, we might not, we've got access to the team. We're working on some team coaching, some team development. Well, the team pack sits with that beautifully, but you also might be looking at the individual members' personal resilience in that team. So it's very flexible in terms of which one you use. And sometimes you might use all 3. Sometimes you might say, no, I'm just doing individual coaching with that leader, and this is the piece I want to look at, is how they're working with their team.
Yes, I can see how that could evolve, and it can become a bit of a journey, can't it? You might start in one place with one particular client or organization and end up somewhere different, and it kind of builds momentum as you go.
Absolutely. And I think always of resilience as a journey, not a destination. So it's a continual piece of work. And so a common intervention, because we do organizational interventions, a common intervention might be exploring personal resilience, then expanding that to team resilience, and then looking at the leadership role in that, so it can be at a team level, a whole organization level.
Well, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
And so if that's worked okay, now we can all see the first deck. So we've got the personal deck open here, haven't we?
The leadership deck.
Oh, the leader, yeah.
Leading, yeah.
Confusing myself. Yes. So this is the leader's deck, and we've pulled out onto the table here this first card or 2 with the model. So do you want to just talk us through what we're looking at so we understand the sort of the overarching context or concept?
And it might be a little bit confusing because this is the leader set and you're seeing the team model. So I just want to explain that first of all, is that for the leader pack, we're actually looking at the extent to which the leader invests in team resilience. So it's still the team model, but instead of the team working on their resilience, it's the leader looking at what they might need to do with their team. So that's why it's still got the team model. So as Martin says, so in the deck, we have images on one side and we have reflective questions on the other side. And for each deck, we have the model. So it's really important if you're working with these cards to get your head around what the model is and what each of the descriptors are. And the card you can see on the screen is our overview of those components. So in this particular leader deck, there are 7 high-level components and 22 subcomponents. Basically, it covers everything that creates team effectiveness in uncertainty, change, high workload, all the sorts of environments we're seeing at the moment. except skill and knowledge and team structure. So we've basically taken everything that creates team effectiveness. We've added things that create resilience. We've added things that allow innovations. It's a very rich sort of subcomponents. So they're really important cards, are those two particular descriptions. And do we want to show what they look like in this one or the next, or the personal card in terms of the back of the cards?
Well, I can just flip these over so we can see that they are double-sided, and I've made these larger obviously just so that we can read them better because there's lots of detail on these particular cards. But if we open the deck, then we can sort of see the different cards that are part of the set. So how many are there in total?
Oh gosh, now you've put me on the spot.
Sorry.
Probably about 40 or so, I think, because there's 22 subdimensions and there might be 2 to 4 for each of those. So if we were, so on one end, if we will just have a look at the questions and then we'll show you the images because they've all got images on the back. So if we were to grab, say, the external radar, let's grab the, or anyone really, external radar, that's it. Okay, so just so you get a little bit of a flavor of what the questioning might look like. Remembering this is the leader pack. So you will be working with the leader on their leadership of the team with this particular deck. And, you know, traditionally we'll use the assessment so they'll know what they're high and low on, but you don't need to have done the assessment. Leaders can choose the card that they think is important for them to work on. And you've got some really deep questioning that you can use to start the conversation, or for the leader to choose the question they want you to ask if you're working in coaching. You can also use it in workshops, you know, where you get people in their teams and you say, you know, as a leader, you know, which areas do you think your teams need to invest in right now that you can support them with? So for each of those areas, as you can see, there's six questions there. So there's a huge repository of really powerful questions that are fantastic for coaching. They're fantastic for opening discussion in groups. And we've certainly used them, all types of teams, all types of leaders. It's really interesting. I didn't think the models would apply across the board, but they do, because they are, you know, we're all humans, so the personal pack obviously resonates, but it also with the teams, I've been really surprised. It doesn't matter whether you're an executive team or a group of volunteers, for example, these questions start a conversation that enables people to then relate it back to their context. So for me, everything's about context. So they work really, really well. And perhaps if we could see the images over the other side, and we can talk about how we might use some of these things when we look at one of the other packs. But
so that's the image on the back of that one.
Yeah, so that's external radar. So that's the, you know, the crocodile eye on you. So yeah, so here we go again. So the images, it's really hard to choose images that are non-biased, that are neutral. So we've used a lot of animals and flowers and, you know, tried to minimize the sort of office looking things. So it's really, really difficult job actually just finding images that match something that's so conceptual. It's probably the most difficult part of the whole design of this really was.
Being there and done that. Yeah, it's you know,
yeah, absolutely. So it's really cool, and of course you can use the images in lots of ways, and I might talk to you about what that might look like when we look at the next pack. But yeah, perhaps are there any questions on anything covered to date before we progress and look at some of the other decks and how you might use them?
Yeah, so feel free to add something into the chat if you have a question at this point. I guess just to clarify for me, when you're working with a leader in this case, and they've obviously got all of these cards to choose from, and there's lots of valuable questions on any one card. So how do they go about choosing which card, or do you choose which card or subset of cards you might present to them for them to start that process?
I think it's really valuable for them to choose the question. You know, it's sort of like, you know, in coaching, what would you like me to ask you? You know, it's, you've chosen that, you know, one of the key areas for you at the moment in your team is, let's take the optimized resources example, you know, that you have far much more work to do than you have people, and people are really struggling with that, you know. So let's have a look at some of these areas that we might be able to work on here. You know, which one of these would be one that you think we could start with? And, you know, you never follow them like in sort of like a, you know, one question after the other. It's just a real starting point. And the great thing is that I found, which surprised me, was once people get their head around these, they don't need facilitation. They can fly on their own. So you could actually, so you could be coaching a leader, and then you might, they might continue with the self-reflection on Deckhive of which question really resonates for me. But absolutely, there is so much in this that you have to be really quite strategic. And when we work with teams, we're always looking at what are the pressure points and the challenges that the team have, and which areas will best actually align, you know, which are the areas you're strong in that you can leverage, and which are the areas where you really need to be focusing. So I try to have a very strategic approach around context, rather than expect people to be good at everything, because there's no way in the world anyone can be good at everything. They never could before, and they definitely can't now. So if you're overwhelming a leader with this, you might be actually working with someone, and you might notice something that you actually think is a real key thing. And so these are great prompters to sort of work with the person. I'm hearing this, you know, does this resonate for you?
Okay,
so
thank you.
Yeah.
But of course, while we're working in Deckhive, then one of the things we can do is to add sticky notes to the table, double click on that and type in whatever notes that are coming to mind. So as we're going through the process, then we can capture things there and come back to it at a later date, of course. So that can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the screenshot, Martin. So
yes.
To be able to, so say you're in a leadership coaching session. We've chosen the card, we've worked on what it is. They've got some actions. I love how you can sticky note, but then of course you can screenshot. So that's brilliant. So you sort of got your summary of the meeting and agreed actions. You can also get people to screenshot one of the cards for their between session activity as well.
Yeah. Excellent. So a couple of questions have come in about the models. So Lucy's asked about where she can read more about your models.
Yeah, so we're going to show you some resources at the end of the session, but within Deckhive, you'll actually see there's a white paper, which I wrote a few years ago, because what I recognized was, even though the work was published independently, there really wasn't anything that brought all the work together. So there's a white paper. We've got a couple of websites. Resilience.tv is our content hub for our community, and we've got Working with Resilience, which is the main site. So they have the models there. They have some sample reports, all sorts of things there. But and also, I can't remember, but I think on the websites you might also be able to find the publications as well, so the academic publications.
Well, thank you. Okay, well, we'll share some of that in our follow-up email when we send out the recording as well. Okay. And Andrew's just asking for a quick recap on the model. So is it better just to kind of do that from?
Yeah, let's look at the model from that. That's a great idea. Let me just get the chat out of the way for me. So if I was to summarize, remembering this is the team, this is what creates team resilience, and all we're really doing with the leader set is we're working with the leader on that. But you'll see with the other set, we're working with the team on this. So basically they cover, as I said, anything that creates team effectiveness, except structure and except talent. So resourceful, for example, is how do we best optimize what we have, and that's a real common one at the moment, where there's more to do than people you have. It looks at things like strengths. It looks like things like workload management and prioritizing. It looks at things like continually evolving. So anything that would create a team which is resourceful. And remember, all these things were done before COVID. And so it's really was almost weird for me that all these things just suddenly became what everyone was talking about, and yet we developed this model way before. Perseverance is really around when things go wrong, what does it look like in that team? Where does the energy for regroup come from? What's the process for regroup? What's the language people use around problem solving and solution? You know, what's the degree of optimism? So it's not stuff around keeping going. Self-care is a cultural self-care. Capabilities, how do we constantly evolve and build capability internally and externally when the landscape's changing around us? Connected is a sense of belonging, connection and care. How often have we heard about that recently? And so on. So you'll find that they really, really resonate with everything people have been talking about the last 2 years, really. I think so, the language as well. And it's very strength focused. It's not about problems, it's about strength. So this is a flip of every imaginable problem in a team. This is a strength-based flip on that.
Yeah, that's great. And so we've got the images, and we've got then a number of cards per area dimension of your model. So sometimes I've seen as we laid out here on this other table, sometimes you'll just work with one of those factors and explore the cards in that, and have a session just around that, rather than needing to kind of unpack the entire model. So let me leave this session then, and we'll open another one where we can show the personal deck. So what's the difference here? What do we need to know? Do you want to talk through the?
Yeah, so we've got the model again, and there's 7 components. It's a bit more straightforward than the team. We're looking at things like aligned purpose and values. We're looking at perspective, optimism. We're looking at stress management strategies. We're looking at support. We're looking at energy and health. We're looking at support networks. You know, it's a very holistic view on the elements that create resilience in the workplace. So really, really practical. So the model, once again, you'll see that for each of those 7 components, it's a color-coded cards. So the purple cards have the purple headings. So you've got a number about living authentically, number about finding your calling, a number about maintaining perspective, and so on. So there are just so many ways you can use these cards, but I'm just going to show you a couple of my favorites. One of the things I have to mention is how amazing Deckhive is for virtual rooms. So I don't consider myself particularly tech savvy. So the very first time we used Deckhive was on a large group of educators that I didn't know, and we were looking at personal resilience. And I was freaking out because I thought, my goodness, you know, I've got them on Zoom and I'm all really comfortable about that. And I'm really comfortable about breakout rooms and getting them back. But what am I going to do when they all go into Deckhive and they go into rooms in Deckhive, and, you know, am I going to lose them? Anyway, it was plain sailing. It's really fantastic because you're working with a large group, and you can actually put them into breakout rooms, and they can go into different sessions within the platform. You just got to make sure you follow the steps. But it's brilliant where they can go in and they can do their own playing around and work with the decks, and then come back into your Zoom room.
So we have these different tables. So as a host of a session, you see this plus symbol at the bottom here, and you can simply add more tables, and they're the ones that we use for the breakout. So right now there's no kind of easy way of sending people to the right table. Unfortunately, you have to kind of rely on the old-fashioned kind of telling them where to go and trusting that they will go where they're supposed to. So that's the kind of thing that we have to be careful about when we're kind of planning and managing a session. But once people are in the right space, that just means that they've got a bit more room to move. Sometimes we have sessions with groups where we just have them on one table. So if you're just asking people to choose one image and drag them across, then if you've got a group of 20, well, then you can probably just work on one table and everybody puts their single card on that space. But as soon as you ask people to choose multiple cards, it gets messy. So then it works out much better for everybody if they have a bit of a different space to work in for each other, for each breakout group. So the way we manage that typically is we say, if you're in breakout room 2 on Zoom or Teams, then use table 2 in Deckhive, and it just means that people know where they're supposed to be.
I also give them a little break, so mainly to get myself organized. I say, right, we're having a 5-minute break now. When we come back, we're going to go into these rooms, and these are your rooms. Yeah, okay. So personal deck,
so just talk us through sort of some of your favorite kind of activities, and what would that look like if we were kind of working together?
So let's have a look at the image side first, please, Martin. So of course, you know, I mean, you guys, you know, on the call, you know all about how to use cards, but I just love using images for check-in and for exploring a concept. So I would commonly use these for things like, right, let's check in at the for the morning or the evening or whatever it is. Choose which card resonates with your resilience right now and why. So really simple check-in. I've used it a lot in workshops where we're exploring what resilience is, and I will say, right, just choose a card that speaks to you to resilience and why. So we're starting to explore, you know, everyone's version of what resilience is. So I just find the cards really fantastic. And I'm constantly surprised with what people see in the cards, you know. So just last week, someone was saying, well, there's this and this. And I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't even see that in that image, you know. So it's fantastic. So the one at the top, a really common one would be there is, I chose that because at the moment, my mood can shift really quickly, you know, and I'm having to really sort of monitor my emotions and how I'm showing up, you know. So fantastic ways in which you can do that. And also check out, you know, checking in, checking out, you know, the checkout might be, you know, in leaving the session today, you know, which one of these, you know, talks to you about your resilience as you leave or whatever. So lots and lots of ways around that I absolutely love.
I do love this picture, especially. What is it? Do you know where that's from?
Oh, they all come from Unsplash. Is that Unsplash?
Yeah. That's very. It's a really cool picture, that one. I do get drawn to that one personally, just for the aesthetics of it.
Which one's you?
Yeah, I'll let the people watching decide that.
The other one in the middle with the nose up in the air. It's like a little gnome or something. All right, so let me just show you my favorite session that I do with the cards. So I think I mentioned earlier that one of the things that really surprised me was how you can use so much of this unfacilitated, you know, once people get their head around things, how easy it is. So one of the things I actually do in my group sessions where I'm working on individual resilience is I do this triad coaching exercise where 2 people coach 1 person for 10 minutes with a view to getting 1 action. So if we flip any one of those cards that are showing at the moment. So what we'll do is we will invite people to move into triads. And the reason I do triads is because there's usually at least 1 in the 3 who's reasonably good at some sort of coaching, because I use this, of course, not with coaches, you know, there might be any variety of occupations. So say it's Martin and Seska and I, okay? So Martin and Seska are coaching me. So the first thing they say is, Kath, which card do you want to be coached on? And I say, well, look, I've chosen recovering at home. And they'll say to me, what made you choose that card? So context is really, really important. So I say, look, I've chosen that card because I'm finding I'm just going from work to home. I'm not getting a break. You know, by the time the kids are gone to bed, you know, I'm just like a, you know, a mess sitting on the settee, you know, sort of looking like, you know, no one's home. So they'll tell me that. And then what they do is, so Martin and Seska then coach me using those questions as prompts. And it's just amazing how people get to fantastic actions in 10 minutes. And so obviously you're doing this on Zoom in breakout rooms. And the other great thing is, because we're doing it in 3s and each of us is having a go, then we get a deeper view on 3 different aspects of the model. So we're learning from them. And they understand our context because they're in our teams, they're in our groups, they're in our organizations. So I really, really love that. The other way we use them is people to take a screenshot of the one they're working on and buddying up with someone and doing a commitment and then checking in 2 weeks' time how they're going, or sharing them at a team meeting. There's so many versatile ways in which you can use this. If you're doing personal coaching, you might give someone some homework and say, look, this is an area you want to explore. I'm going to give you this card. Which of these areas do you want to do your reflection on? So being a little bit more directive there. So it can be directive, it can be non-directive. I just love how these come to life through people, and you hear all the different things that people do with them that you hadn't even imagined before. You can do card swapping. I can give you one and you can give me one, and we have to follow it through. Again, it's just like bingo or whatever. Sorry, Martin. Well,
that's the fun thing about cards, isn't it? Is it the way that you use them isn't limited, and I think that's what's great for professionals working in whatever space they're in and being the experts that they are in their subject area, but also working with different people and different teams, different organizations, and different activities and ways to use these resources become more relevant or as appropriate in different contexts. So that flexibility, I think, is a real benefit. So when you're talking about the triad exercise there, then, so even if these people who are doing the coaching have never done any coaching before, you find that works just as well because they've got the questions on the cards?
I've been just astounded how it has, because you think that they've got to have some reasonable understanding, but they don't. This prompts them enough, and you provide enough context, and it's just 10 minutes. It can't get too awkward. You're just asking them for one small wise step. You're not asking them to solve the problems of the world, just one small action. People really get into it. It's really great, actually. So I love that. And for me as a facilitator, I sit back for half an hour. Don't have to do anything. I love it. They're doing the work, and resilience is about a healthier relationship with your challenges. So it really enables people to choose the bit that they want to work on, rather than a generic, these are the components and you need to be thinking about this. This goes straight to the jugular of, this is my pain point. I want a healthier relationship with this pain point, and I've chosen this card, and I'm going to get some really nice attention on me for 10 minutes on my problem with a strategy. So that's the personal cards.
Thank you. And is there any sort of tips you'd share at that point around things that can sometimes go wrong with these kind of activities, or things where people get a bit stuck and need a bit of help? Any tips?
You wander around, and you just, if they're stuck, you just prompt, and, so I don't really sit on my bum for 30 minutes. I do wander around. And sometimes I thought, my goodness, that's not a card I choose, because there are some around values and values alignment, but I've been really surprised at some amazing coaching at really deep issues in that sort of scenario where you think trust is not there. The other thing is that if people don't want to do much, you can choose the safe ones like exercise and sleep. There's some really safe ones which are around energy. So, it's really easy to talk about whether I need to eat better food or exercise more. It's a really easy thing to talk about, whereas other people might really want to go to values, might want to go to purpose, might want to go to support and being vulnerable.
When you're starting a session, if you're working with a team for the first time, do you spend much time credentializing this model and the evidence for it? Because it would be very easy for them to come up with a list of things like exercise and diet, which intuitively seem to make sense about why that might be good for your resilience. But do you find that's important to kind of get them to buy into the validity of this content?
Yeah. So one of the ways I use the images is a bit aligned with that, Martin, because I'll actually say, right, choose one image that speaks to resilience. And then in your small group, share why you chose that image. And then in the debriefing, I'm then mapping that onto the model. So you might have talked, because you said you run, so you might have said running is my real way of de-stressing. Someone else might have said, I quickly regroup and reframe, so what I'm able to do is I'm able to hear their context, hear their language, And then I bring that back into the model, because the model is around recovery and reset. It's about support. It's about aligned purpose and values. It's around feedback, being able to be vulnerable. So there's just about everything that people come up with, you'll be able to map across the model. So it's lovely. I think it's really important in this resilience space to be cognizant that resilience is about their context. It's not this sort of thing that you are or you're not. It's actually about a healthier relationship with your context. Yeah. And I've not fallen into any problems, mate. I think it's because there's those safe cards. Yeah, and I don't always do triad coaching. Obviously, you know, it's just one thing that I started to really enjoy, and I almost always use it now. It works.
Yeah, if it works and engages people, I mean, that's the most important thing, isn't it? That engages them so that they can continue that journey, as you were saying earlier. You don't want it to be a standalone intervention, do you? Okay, so is there anything else you want to show us around the personal deck, or should we have a quick look at the...
Let's have a look at the team one, because that would be good, I think.
Okay, and so as I'm just leaving here, what I'll do as we're going into the team deck is I would just point out some of the resources. So for each of the decks in the Deckhive library, when you scroll down, if you're on one of our paid plans and you have access to use the deck, or even on the trial actually as well, you'll see this how to use section, and this is where some of those resources you mentioned earlier live. So the white paper sits here, some suggested activities, and the toolkit for accreditation. That's all there. So that should be hopefully helpful. And also, if you want to then dig a little deeper and you don't want to use Google for whatever reason, then you can always click on here to learn more about Kath and find links to her social media and YouTube and website.
Actually, as you were scrolling down, I noticed my son's name there. So my son, Allard, good Welsh name, because I'm Welsh in heritage. Well, not in heritage, I am Welsh. He helped with all of this as well. So it's been very much a bit of a family, because I'm not a big corporate, so it's been a real family endeavour. So yeah, it's great to see him acknowledged on that. So the team one, yeah. So let's go to the model, you know. So we were talking about earlier the leader cards, and I was saying that the model is the same, you know, the individual model and the team model are different, but the leader cards are based on the team model, because as a leader, you're needing to invest in your personal resilience, which is the individual pack, but you're also having to invest in your team. So that the team investment by the leader is the leader pack. Okay. Now, sorry. Yeah.
We've got a webinar on.
Okay.
Yeah, not too bad. How are you? Oh.
Someone's not on mute. All right. So the most common way I use these particular cards actually follows our assessment, which I know you're not doing, but I'll just tell you what that looks like.
Yeah.
Still follow the formula. So people have done the assessment, and the first thing we do is, before we even look at the results, is I work with the team on what are their key challenges at the moment, and how do we condense those to the top 3? Because I think it's really, really important to look at team development strategically. I mean, in the past, I know I've done so many diagnostics where we're always trying to take the team from, you know, as high as it can go above the benchmark on everything. Well, I think we need to throw that out the door, because we can't do that anymore. So what I'm interested in is, what are the challenges and how do we condense them to the key pain points? And then let's look at, for each of those challenges, what are the strengths they can leverage, and what are the areas that they might need to develop, because they're really important to that challenge. So that's so easy with cards, in that what you actually can do is you can actually get them to group. It's slightly messy, but you can start to get them to pull the cards onto the main platform and put them in order, and choose for that particular challenge which are relevant and which are strengths and which are relevant and which are development areas. And it's a little bit of messing and a little bit of messy and a little bit of conversation. But then you'll end up with probably 2 cards of strengths 2 cards of development, and then the questions prompt the discussion. So we're then being very, very focused. So say, for example, what cards have we got here? Say life work balance. We've got one of those cards here. So say one of the key challenges that the team had come up with was boundaries and 24/7 and how that's problematic. And that comes under the culture of self-care. Then we will be looking at what are our strengths in that area and what are things that get in the way of that. And so the questions are really good at prioritizing where we need to be spending our energy. And I love the way that Martin's doing these little things at the same time. So we might say, actually, we're really good at work-life balance. What is it we're doing that we want to keep? What do we want to keep precious? And then we might say, what are the barriers to that? And it might be workload allocation, the usual stuff. What's one small step that we can actually do to develop? So with this team thing, the conversations are just so rich because they're all strengths-based. So you can talk about, for example, if you've got workload inequity and people are cheesed off because one person's not doing enough and so on. The questions around that are, how do we ensure transparency in our work? How do we map workload activity? So they're very, very positive frames which enable people to talk about quite contentious things in a team with a really positive frame. So it works really well to have that strengths-based focus on everything that allows the team to be the best it can be in a system. And I tend not to use thriving much anymore because I think we're not able to thrive at the moment. We're aspiring to, but the whole thriving language I'm pulling back a bit more on, and I'm talking more about be the best we can be in the system. So out of this session, we might have just have 4 strengths to leverage, 4 things we're working on. Tick, great session. You don't want too overwhelming, and then you might go the next session, you might work on another thing. So there's 40 odd cards, it's going to take you a year. You might, the other thing we do if we've got large groups is each team might choose one card that they're going to be working on for the next month and report back in their team. So it becomes a work in progress over a period of time to start to focus on various things as you go through. So the team stuff is, I'm spending more and more time on team versus individual. I think we've spent a lot of energy on individual resilience the last 2 years. I'm not discounting that, and clearly people have got to take accountability for how they're showing up, and they've got to be supported in that. But there's so much we can do in the team space, creating that alignment. Yeah. So you're going to say something, Martin?
Oh, I was just going to say about the framing you were talking about. I think that is so important, and it brings to mind. David Cooperrider often says about that behind every cynic is an unexpressed hope. And I think that idea of kind of orienting people towards what is it they actually want rather than what do they not want anymore. I think that's a simple change, but a really powerful one. So, and Lucy's just asking, are the questions on the cards based on appreciative inquiry?
Yeah, I mean, I've been informed by lots of things, I suppose, over my career, but certainly appreciative inquiry. I love solution-focused coaching. I did a whole, heap of stuff on that, probably about 15 years ago. I became really interested in that whole language there. Certainly some of the people who helped me with this are systemic team coaching. Dr. Kathryn Carr, who works with Peter Hawkins, is my North American lead for my work, so Kathryn had input in terms of the system approach, because, I think a lot of the traditional team effectiveness has been very internally focused. This is also about outside in, forward, back, all that sort of jargon that we're using now. The systemic approach to coaching, perfectly aligns with this work. So again, that's becoming really big. And then some of the questions are just, obvious things that you would ask. So let me have a look at change agility. How would stakeholders describe our agility? So an outside in focus again, just really simple, straightforward examples. And you'll find that not every question resonates, but that doesn't matter. This is just a starting point. And, and it's amazing how they might just ask one and off they go. And then others might need a little bit more prompting and, you know, whatever, but they're not designed to ask one question after the other in order. That's not the purpose at all. It's just to spark a conversation starter.
Yeah, fantastic. So before I forget, let me just ask about your accreditation program. So those who want to kind of go deeper into this subject matter, how does that work?
Yeah, so I mentioned we've got a really large global community of people who use our work. So I think the accreditation is one of the, I just saw as one of the resources on Deckhive, but we run it's virtual these days, a 8-hour program over a couple of weeks with lots of pre-work and resources that basically equip people to be able to use our full, we call it the toolkit, the raw toolkit, all those assessments, and have access to them. And we have a fantastic community of practice that meet regularly, and you know, and in fact, we had a community of practice on Deckhive, I think a week or so ago. So it was great for them to, you know, get inspired on how they can now use the stack, which they've been using manually in a virtual space. So that was great. Yeah, so accreditation, yeah, there's a flyer in there, but just go to resilience.tv and send us a message if you want any more information on that. So constantly trying to expand our reach. We've got quite a few people in UK, so I know there'll be probably quite a lot of UK people on the call. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly recognise a few of the faces here.
Yeah,
so
we've got about 30 or 40 people in the NHS at the moment, which is wonderful.
Excellent. Yeah, well, it's important work at the moment, isn't it? Well, always has been, but it's especially important now. So thank you for everything that you're doing in this space. So was there anything else that you wanted to mention that you haven't already before we kind of bring it to a close? But while you're thinking of that, if anyone else has any questions, if you want to put them into the chat, then please do. We can take a couple of minutes for that, unless your question is too difficult, in which case we might find we've run out of time.
Yeah.
Is there anything, Kathy, you wanted to mention?
No, yeah, so I guess I just want to reinforce, Martin, the flexibility. Okay, so, you know, when you are looking at, you know, so I'm guessing a lot of people here are consultants and coaches, internal coaches or external coaches, to look at, you know, who are you working with, what is it they're wanting to achieve, and which one of these will provide the best first lens on it, you know. So I think we want all lenses on, but I think if people are coming and they're struggling, you would normally go to personal resilience first, because that's what they're coming for. If teams are wanting to re-energize and reset, you would go to teamwork as a starting point. So lots of flexibility around how you use them. I think I just want to reinforce that. And also how the models are really straightforward, but they're very, very comprehensive. In the personal deck, you can go to values alignment, whether this is the job I really wanted to be, what my support network looks like, what my reset and recovery looks like, whether or not I feel at risk at work and can't be vulnerable, psychological safety. It's just amazing where with such a straightforward model, the conversation can go. And of course, even more for teams, because teams are more complex. So that's probably the other very positive feedback we get is the straightforward simplicity of the model really resonates, but it doesn't mean it's you know, that it doesn't negate the complexity that sits underneath it.
Yeah, no, and that's, you know, very clear from the all of the research you've been doing and the citations that you're getting. So yeah, it's really, really impressive to kind of see that blend of something that's very accessible, but at the same time is robust. So excellent. Well, I don't see any questions yet, but if any come in, then we can address them. But while we're waiting, just in case any do appear, I would just quickly like to highlight a couple of points about Deckhive to finish. One is the library. So obviously we have Kath's 3 fabulous decks in the library, but we have all of these other fabulous decks as well. So whether you're wanting to work with bridge to inquiry or coaching questions or picture decks, strengths cards, motivation cards, emotional health cards, there's all sorts of different card decks available in the Deckhive library, and more being added all the time. So there are plenty of different decks to explore and play with and try out in your work, whatever line of work that might be. And as I mentioned before, we have a 30-day a free trial that gives you unlimited use of the whole system, so you can play and bash it and test it as much as you like. I'd recommend using friends and family and colleagues to test the system and find your way around how to use it before you use it in anger with paying clients or colleagues who might judge you if you press the wrong button. So that's always a useful thing to do. So one question we have from Sarah is how do you buy the cards outside of Deckhive? So presumably available on your website?
If you're in Australia, you can go to workingresilience.com.au and you'll see the checkout. If you're in UK, just message me and I'll put you in contact with our UK lead, Paul Chudley, who's in Chepstow, so he can provide hard copies. He's got some over there as well, so all good.
Fabulous. Excellent. All right, well, thanks for giving up your evening to come and join us and share your story and to explore the cards with us. We've had some lovely comments in the chat, so it's really nice to see people find it useful and expect to be using them a lot going forwards. So so yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Martin.
And for those of you who want to join us for future sessions, we've got other Deckhive Introduces webinars with other decks coming up in the next few months, so keep an eye on the schedule for those on our Eventbrite page. So thanks very much, take care, and see you soon.